There is a question almost everyone asks at some point, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning, usually when something has gone wrong, and it sounds like this. What exactly am I looking for in another person?
And the answers people give tend to fall into two categories. Either very specific, tall, funny, good with money, wants kids, shares my taste in music, or very vague, I want someone I connect with, someone who gets me, someone I can build a life with.
Both of those answers, as it turns out, are probably pointing at the wrong things. And philosophy has been trying to tell us that for about 2,500 years.
Welcome to Philosophy for Lunch. I'm Claire.
And I'm Shawn. Today we are talking about the philosophy of love, not as a romantic subject, though it is that too, but as a genuine philosophical question with a long and surprisingly practical history. What is love, actually? What are we responding to when we feel it? Is beauty objective or subjective? And what does the answer to that question mean for how we should think about choosing a partner? Big ideas, human conversations. Let's go.
To understand where the philosophy of love starts, we need to go back to Plato, specifically to a dialogue called the Symposium, which is one of the most unusual texts in the philosophical canon. It is set at a dinner party in Athens, a drinking party really, where several notable figures, including Socrates, take turns giving speeches in praise of Eros, the god of love. It reads partly like philosophy and partly like something you would find in a very literate magazine. And buried inside it is one of the most ambitious theories of love and beauty ever proposed. The speech that matters most for our purposes is the one Socrates attributes to a woman named Diotima of Mantinea, a priestess and philosopher whom Socrates claims taught him everything he knows about love. Whether Diotima was a real historical figure or a literary device Plato invented is debated, but the argument itself is extraordinary.
Diotima describes what she calls the ladder of beauty, a progression of loves that represents the proper development of the philosophical soul. You begin by loving a single beautiful body. That love, if you follow it properly, leads you to recognize that the beauty in that body is the same beauty present in all beautiful bodies. And so you come to love beautiful bodies as a class rather than fixating on one. From there, you ascend to the beauty of souls, of minds and characters and ways of being in the world, which is more beautiful still, then to the beauty of activities and institutions, then to the beauty of knowledge. And finally, at the top of the ladder, you arrive at beauty itself, the form of beauty, eternal and unchanging, the source of all beautiful things.
This is Plato's idealism applied to love. Beauty, on this view, is not in the eye of the beholder. It is objective, it is real. It exists independently of any mind that perceives it. When you find someone beautiful, when you are drawn to them, when love arises, you are, however confusedly and imperfectly, responding to genuine beauty. The feeling is not arbitrary. It is tracking something real in the world.
And the implication for love is significant. If beauty is objective, then love properly understood is not merely a personal preference. It is a kind of perception, a recognition. When Diotima says the goal of the ascent is to arrive at the form of beauty itself, she is saying that the deepest form of love is not love of a particular person. It is love of what that person participates in. The person is an occasion for recognizing something universal.
Which is both exalting and, if you think about it carefully, somewhat alarming. Because it means the particular person, their specific face, their specific history, the irreplaceable texture of who they are is almost incidental in Plato's account. What you are really in love with is the form. The person is a window, not a destination.
And yet the Symposium is also full of a very different kind of love speech. Aristophanes, the comic playwright, gives the famous account of the origin of love as a longing for a lost half. In the beginning, humans were whole beings, round and complete, until Zeus split them in two. And ever since, each half has been searching for its specific, particular complement. That account is not about ascending toward the universal. It is about the longing for a specific other. It is, in some ways, the opposite of Diotima's ladder.
Plato puts both speeches in the same text, and I do not think that is an accident. He is showing us the tension that runs through the whole philosophy of love, between the universal and the particular, between love as recognition of the eternal and love as attachment to the specific, irreplaceable person in front of you. That tension has not been resolved in 2,500 years. And it is the right place to start, because everything else in this episode is, in some sense, trying to navigate it.
It is worth noting that Plato's conception of love was also deeply intertwined with his conception of education. Eros, for Plato, is not merely a feeling. It is a motivating force, the energy that drives the soul toward knowledge, toward the good, toward the beautiful. The lover and the beloved are both elevated by the encounter. The experience of loving someone beautiful should not leave you where it found you. It should set you in motion toward something higher, something more real. Love, properly understood, is philosophical. It is a form of inquiry into what matters most.
Which is a very demanding picture of what love is supposed to do, and one that most contemporary accounts of romance have largely abandoned. We tend to think of love as something that happens to you, a feeling that arises, that you either have or do not have, that is pleasant when present and painful when absent. Plato is arguing for something much more active. Love is not a state. It is a practice of attention and assent. It asks something of you. And what it asks is that you take seriously what you are actually responding to when you feel it.
There's one more speech in the Symposium worth naming, because it complicates the picture in a productive way. Alcibiades, the brilliant, charismatic, politically reckless Athenian general, arrives at the party drunk and gives a speech not about Eros in the abstract, but about his specific experience of loving Socrates. And his account is striking because it is not about ascending toward beauty or recovering a lost half. It is about being pursued by something he cannot escape and cannot fully understand. Socrates, Alcibiades says, is like a statue of Silenus, ugly on the outside, but containing figures of the gods within. The beauty is hidden. You have to look past the surface to find it. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. The love that follows is not comfortable or elevating. It is disturbing. It confronts you with your own failures. It will not let you be less than you could be.
That account of love as something that confronts you, that refuses to let you settle for the comfortable version of yourself, is philosophically interesting precisely because it is so different from both the Platonic ascent and the Aristophanic longing. Alcibiades is not ascending toward the form. He is being undone by a specific person. The love is not elevating him. It is exposing him. And I think that is a more honest description of what love actually does in a great many cases. It does not make you better by taking you higher. It makes you better by showing you, with uncomfortable clarity, where you still need to grow.
The Platonic picture beauty as objective love, as the recognition of something real and universal, dominated Western thinking about love for a very long time. You can see it in medieval courtly love traditions, in Renaissance poetry, in the idea that beauty is a divine gift and that loving the beautiful is a way of loving God. The objectivity of beauty was not just a philosophical position, it was a cultural and theological one.
The shift toward a more subjective account of beauty is associated with the Enlightenment and the rise of empiricism. David Hume, in the 18th century, argued that beauty is not a quality that exists in objects themselves. It exists in the mind that perceives them. When you say something is beautiful, you are reporting a feeling, a particular kind of pleasure that arises in you when you encounter that thing. Someone else might not have the same feeling. And neither of you is wrong, because there is no objective fact of the matter to be right or wrong about.
Hume's famous formulation: beauty is no quality in things themselves, it exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty. The standards of taste, he acknowledged, are not entirely arbitrary. There is such a thing as refined taste, and some aesthetic judgments are better informed and more consistent than others. But the foundation is subjective. Beauty is a response, not a property.
Kant tried to split the difference in a way that is philosophically interesting. He distinguished between the agreeable, which is purely subjective, a matter of personal taste, and the beautiful which, while not an objective property of things, carries a kind of universal claim. When you say something is beautiful, Kant argued, you are not just reporting a personal feeling. You are implicitly claiming that everyone ought to find it beautiful. You are making a judgment that reaches beyond yourself, even though it is grounded in feeling rather than concept. It is subjective, but universally aspiring.
What this shift from Plato to Hume to Kant means for love is significant. If beauty is objective, then love has a kind of external anchor. There is a fact of the matter about what is worth loving. If beauty is subjective, then love is also fundamentally a matter of personal response, with no external standard to appeal to. And if Kant is right that beauty is subjective but universally aspiring, then love sits somewhere in between, deeply personal but not entirely arbitrary, reaching towards something shared even if it cannot be grounded in objective fact.
The contemporary default is broadly Humean. We tend to believe, at least in practice, that beauty is subjective, that there is no fact of the matter about who or what is beautiful, that attraction is entirely personal, and that therefore the standards by which we choose partners are also entirely personal. There is no right answer. There is only what works for you.
And I want to push back on that a little, not to reinstate Platonic objectivism, but to suggest that the fully subjective picture leaves something important out. Because if love and attraction are entirely arbitrary personal responses, then the question of what you are looking for in a partner has no real answer. It is just a matter of whatever you happen to feel. And that picture does not match the experience most people have of love as something that tracks something real about the other person, something that is genuinely there to be recognized, not merely projected.
So, if love is neither purely objective in the Platonic sense nor purely subjective in the Humean sense, what is it actually responding to? I think this is the most practically important question in the episode.
The philosopher Robert Nozick, in an essay called Love's Bond, argued that love involves a distinctive kind of identification, a pooling of identity. When you love someone, you come to think of your well-being and theirs as intertwined. Their flourishing matters to you not instrumentally, not because it benefits you, but because in some genuine sense, it is partly yours. You form what Nozick calls a we, a unit that is more than the sum of its parts.
And the significant thing about Nozick's account is that what makes someone the right person to form that we with is not primarily their individual qualities considered in isolation. It is the fit between who they are and who you are. The love is not directed at abstract qualities, intelligence, kindness, ambition, as if you were assembling a checklist. It is directed at this person, in their specificity, as someone with whom a particular kind of shared life becomes possible.
Which is where I want to introduce the distinction that I think is the most underappreciated one in how people think about relationships, the distinction between values and philosophy.
Say more about what you mean by that.
When people talk about compatibility, about what they are looking for in a partner, they usually talk about values. We have the same values. We want the same things. We both care about family or adventure or financial security. And values matter. I am not dismissing them. But values are relatively easy to identify, relatively easy to articulate, and this is the crucial part: they change. The things you value at 25 are not the same things you will value at 40. What you think matters most shifts over time, under the pressure of experience, loss, growth, failure. Values are important, but they are not stable foundations.
Whereas philosophy, the way you fundamentally see the world, is something deeper and more durable. Not your opinions, not your preferences, not your current list of priorities, but your basic orientation toward reality. How you relate to uncertainty, whether you process difficulty by going inward or reaching outward, whether you see the world as fundamentally abundant or fundamentally scarce, how you think about obligation to yourself, to others, to the future, how you handle being wrong, whether you are drawn toward complexity or toward resolution. These are not values exactly. They are something prior to values, the lens through which values are formed and interpreted.
And the argument is that matching philosophy is more important for the long-term viability of a relationship than matching values, precisely because philosophy is more stable and more foundational. Two people who share a philosophy of how to engage with the world can navigate diverging values, can accommodate growth and change, and the fact that what each of them prioritizes will shift over time. Two people who share a list of current values but operate from fundamentally different philosophical orientations will find, over time, that the values were the easy part. The philosophy is where the friction is.
Consider two people who both say they value honesty and they mean it. Both of them. But one has a philosophy that the world is essentially legible and manageable, that problems have solutions if you work at them carefully enough, that clarity is almost always achievable. And the other has a philosophy that the world is fundamentally ambiguous, that most important things resist resolution, that sitting with uncertainty is a permanent feature of a good life, rather than a temporary problem to be solved. Those two people can both genuinely value honesty. But what honesty means to them, how they practice it, what they expect from it, how they respond when it does not resolve things, all of that will be shaped by their different philosophies. And eventually that difference will matter more than the shared value.
The same applies to how people handle conflict. Two people can both value direct communication. But if one has a philosophy that conflict is fundamentally a problem to be eliminated as quickly as possible, and the other has a philosophy that conflict is a necessary and productive part of any deep relationship, they will experience each other's approach as a kind of betrayal, each one thinking the other is not living up to the shared value, when actually what they disagree about is something prior to the value. They disagree about what conflict is for.
Or how people relate to growth and change. Two people can both say they value personal growth, but one has a philosophy that growth is primarily a solo project, internal work, self-improvement, the cultivation of individual excellence. And the other has a philosophy that growth is inherently relational, that you become who you are in and through your relationships, that the relationship is itself the site of the most important development. Those two people will have radically different expectations of what a partnership is for, and the shared value of growth will not protect them from that difference.
I think it is also worth being precise about what philosophical compatibility does not mean, because I do not want this to sound like an argument for sameness. Two people with identical philosophies would probably produce a very boring relationship. The argument is not that you need to see the world in exactly the same way. It is that you need to see the world in ways that are mutually intelligible ways that can speak to each other, challenge each other, and ultimately grow together. A Stoic and an existentialist can build a life together if they share a fundamental orientation toward honesty and toward treating difficulty as something to be engaged rather than avoided. What they probably cannot do is build a life together if one of them believes the world is fundamentally controllable and the other believes it is fundamentally not. Because that difference will shape every major decision they face, from how to handle illness to how to think about money to how to raise children.
The practical implication is that the question to bring to a potential partner is not, do we agree about the important things, because that question is too easy to answer yes to, and the important things shift. The question is, do we disagree in compatible ways? Can we hold our differences without them becoming fractures? Can we respect each other's conclusions even when we reach them by different routes? And is the disagreement itself productive? Does it make both of us think harder? Or does it simply generate friction with no light? That is a much harder question, but it is the right one.
So, if the philosophical compatibility argument is right, if what matters most is not a matching list of values, but a matching orientation toward the world, then the question of how you choose a partner becomes considerably more interesting and considerably more difficult.
Because most of the machinery of modern dating is optimized for values matching. The questionnaires, the profile prompts, the first date conversations about what you want in life, all of that is designed to surface values, preferences, life goals. Do you want kids? Where do you want to live? How important is your career? Those are values questions. They are the layer that is easiest to articulate and easiest to assess quickly, and they genuinely matter.
But philosophy is harder to surface in a first conversation and harder to assess on a timeline that dating typically allows. You do not discover how someone relates to uncertainty by asking them about it. You discover it by watching how they behave when something uncertain happens. You do not learn someone's philosophy of conflict by discussing it in the abstract. You learn it by being in conflict with them, which takes time and a degree of safety that most relationships have not yet developed when the important compatibility questions are being decided.
There is a philosophical tradition that connects here the existentialist one, which we go deeper on next week with de Beauvoir. The existentialist claim is that the self is not a fixed thing you discover. It is a project you build through choices and commitments and the relationships you enter, which means that who you are philosophically is not fully formed before you enter a relationship. It is partly constituted by the relationship itself. The relationship does not just reveal your philosophy, it shapes it.
Which adds another layer of complexity. You are not just looking for someone whose philosophy matches yours as it currently is. You are looking for someone whose philosophical orientation is compatible with who you are becoming and who you will help each other become. That is a much harder thing to assess, and it probably requires a different set of questions than most people bring to the process.
What kinds of questions? I think the most useful ones are not about preferences or goals, but about the person's relationship to difficulty. How do they handle being wrong? Not in the abstract, what do they actually do when they are corrected, when a belief they held turns out to be mistaken? Do they dig in or do they update? And how do they relate to the limits of their own understanding? Are they comfortable not knowing things? Or does uncertainty generate anxiety that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible?
How someone responds to failure is another one. Not just professional failure, but the small daily failures, the moments when they said the wrong thing or misread a situation or did not live up to their own standard. Do they take those seriously without being destroyed by them? Or do they either dismiss them too quickly or dwell in them too long? How a person carries their own failures tells you a great deal about their philosophy of what it means to be a human being. and whether that philosophy is one you can build a life alongside.
And perhaps most importantly, how do they relate to the people they no longer love? Not just former partners, though, that too, but friends they have grown apart from, family members they are estranged from, communities they have left. How someone talks about the people they used to be close to, and why those relationships ended, is a remarkably reliable window into their philosophy of human connection, into what they believe relationships are for, and what they believe about their own role in them.
None of these are the questions that dating profiles ask. They are not the questions that first dates typically surface. They emerge slowly, over time, through the accumulation of shared experience, which is an argument for a certain kind of patience, for understanding that the most important compatibility questions cannot be answered in the early months of a relationship, and that the speed at which modern dating moves is often working against the kind of knowing that actually matters.
I want to bring in one more philosophical thread before we get to the reflection, because I think it is essential to the picture. The question of what it means to love someone over time, not the initial recognition, not the early intensity, but the sustained choice to keep building a shared life, is one that philosophy has addressed surprisingly rarely, and often inadequately.
The dominant cultural script for romantic love is still heavily influenced by Platonic and romantic ideas about the initial recognition, the moment of falling, the sense of having found your other half. And that moment is real and important. But it is not the same thing as the love that sustains a decades-long partnership. Those are related but different phenomena, and conflating them is one of the sources of the most common romantic disappointments.
The philosopher Erich Fromm, writing in The Art of Loving in 1956, made what I think is still one of the most important observations in the literature. He argued that in contemporary culture, people treat love primarily as a matter of being loved, of finding the right object, the right person who will give them the feeling of love, rather than as a capacity to be developed. Love, for Fromm, is not primarily a feeling that happens to you. It is a practice, a skill, an art that requires cultivation, discipline, and knowledge. You do not fall into love and then maintain it. You develop the capacity to love, and that capacity can be directed at a person you have chosen.
Which connects directly to the philosophy of compatibility argument. If love is a practice rather than primarily a feeling, then the question of who is right for you is not only about who produces the right initial feeling, it is about who you can practice love with most fully, who creates the conditions in which your capacity to love is most able to develop and express itself. And that is very much a question of philosophical compatibility. Can this person hold the full complexity of who you are? Can you hold theirs? Is this a relationship in which both people can become more fully themselves, or one that requires each of you to be less?
The question of change is also unavoidable here. People change. Over the course of a long relationship, both people will become significantly different from who they were when they chose each other. Values will shift, priorities will evolve. What seemed essential may become less so. What seemed peripheral may become central. A relationship built only on the alignment of current values is fragile in the face of that change. A relationship built on a shared philosophy, a shared way of engaging with life, with each other, with difficulty and growth, has better tools for navigating it.
If the self is fundamentally individual and complete, then a partner is something you add to an already formed identity, a complement to what you already are. But if the self is a project, as the existentialists argue, then a partner is something more fundamental. They are part of the conditions under which you become who you are. Choosing a partner is not choosing a companion for a self you already have. It is partly constituting the self you will be.
Which is why the philosophy of love and the philosophy of the self are not separable questions. They are the same question approached from different angles. And it is why this episode and next week's episode on de Beauvoir belong together. De Beauvoir's argument that the self is always a construction, always a becoming rather than a being, has direct implications for how we think about love. If you are always in the process of becoming, then so is your partner. And the question of love is partly the question of whether you are becoming in compatible directions, and whether the relationship itself is one of the forces shaping that becoming well.
I want to come back to the opening question. What exactly are you looking for in another person? And try to give it a more philosophically informed answer than the ones we started with.
The Platonic answer is, you are looking for someone in whom you recognize beauty, real beauty, something that points beyond the particular person to something universal and enduring. There is something right about that. The initial recognition in love does feel like seeing something real, not merely projecting. The feeling is not arbitrary, something is being tracked.
The Humean correction is, but what you are tracking is partly a response in you, not just a property in them. Two people can encounter the same person and have entirely different responses. The beauty you see is real, but it is real in the encounter, in the specific meeting of who you are and who they are, not in some quality they possess independently of you.
And the philosophical compatibility argument adds, what makes that encounter generative over time, what makes it capable of sustaining a life rather than just an initial feeling, is not primarily the list of values you happen to share right now. It is the deeper match in how you each see the world, how you each relate to uncertainty and difficulty and growth, how you each understand what a human life is for. That is what you are really looking for, even if you do not have the vocabulary to ask for it directly.
What that means practically is a shift in what you pay attention to when you are getting to know someone. Less attention to the checklist, the values, the preferences, the current life goals, and more attention to the philosophy. How do they think? How do they handle not knowing? What do they do with difficulty? Who do they become under pressure? Those questions take longer to answer. They require actual experience of someone, not just a profile or a first conversation. But they are the questions that actually predict whether a relationship can last.
There is something Plato got right that gets lost in the subjectivist tradition. When you love someone, you are not just responding to a bundle of current properties. You are responding to a person, to someone with a history, a trajectory, a way of being in the world that is genuinely their own. What love at its best does is recognize that not just who someone is right now, but who they are in the fullest sense. The person they have been, the person they are becoming, the person they could be. That is a form of recognition that is more than just personal preference. It is a genuine seeing.
Next week, Claire takes the solo seat for an episode that follows directly from this one, Simone de Beauvoir and the construction of self. One is not born a woman, one becomes one. And the broader claim behind that sentence, that the self is always a project, never a fixed thing. If love is partly about who you are becoming, then understanding how the self is constructed is not an optional philosophical exercise. It is one of the most important things you can know about the person you are trying to love.
If this episode made you think differently about what you were looking for or about the person you are already with, share it with someone who is asking the same questions. That is how this show finds the people it is meant for.
Sources and further reading are in the show notes.
We are Philosophy for Lunch. New episodes every Sunday.
Big ideas, human conversations.
See you next week.